Hey everyone, this is Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. Today we're going to take a look at this summer's upcoming Jupiter-Saturn square. This is something that is in the process of building and developing ever since Jupiter entered Gemini at the end of May. This square will build between now and August. In August, the two planets meet. They then separate as they continue on their separate paths through direct and retrograde motions that they're in. And then they meet back up again in December of this year. And so we're going to talk about this not just in terms of what's coming in August, but the overall process of the two planets squaring one another, which can be felt as soon as the two planets are in a whole sign square with one another, which again, they've been since late May. I want to do this because Jupiter-Saturn squares are very dynamic. They imply a kind of long-term process of structural change. And I'm going to talk about these meanings at the outset here. But then in particular today, I want to talk about what kind of effect Saturn has on Jupiter. Saturn's in the superior square. Saturn's also in Jupiter's other sign of Pisces. And so what's the interaction between the two of them? And I'm going to talk specifically about Saturn being in the superior square and the kind of pressures that Saturn places on Jupiter within this dynamic. So that is our goal today. Before we get into it, as always, don't forget to like and subscribe, share your comments and reflections. If you've got anything to share, we love hearing from people. You can find transcripts of any of my daily talks on the website, nightlightastrology.com. Now, I also want to point you guys over to a couple of things that are coming up. Let me just put this up on the screen here. Sorry, I thought I was ready. So go over to nightlightastrology.com. You can click on the events page and go to the speaker series. Our summer speaker series is coming up July 13th, 14th, and 21st. 3 speakers, very interesting topics. Really excited. T. Susan Chang is with us talking about the decans. She's written a great book on the decans. We're very excited to have her. Erica Beach giving a talk on Sedna. Jeannie Frisha giving a talk on art and astrology. So some really interesting talks coming up this summer. Click on the events tab, go to live talks. You can see my monthly webinars. Uranus in Gemini is the next one, July 18th, that I am giving. And we're going to be previewing Uranus's entrance into Gemini next year. So some cool things coming up in the month of July. Be sure to check those out. And on that note, let's shift our focus now to the Jupiter-Saturn square. I am sick, as you can tell. And so my energy and stamina is not what it usually is. So I'm going a little shorter on these episodes just so that I can preserve my energy and try not to, what is the word I'm looking for? Like draw out how long I am sick. I'm trying to rest, so I'm making these episodes a little shorter than they otherwise would be because I'm just running out of energy earlier than I usually do as I've been sick and recording this week. Oh my goodness. All right. So let's go and let's shift gears here to look at this Jupiter-Saturn square. So what I want you all to notice is that here we are today, Tuesday, June 25th, and the two planets are quite a ways away. We have Jupiter at 7 degrees of Gemini, and we have Saturn at 19 Pisces. So they're a full 12 degrees apart. But this is what happens over the course of the summer. If we go forward by some weeks, we're going to see that by the end of July, now they're just 4 degrees apart. And by early August, they are within the 3-degree engagement range. This is about August 6th that I'm looking at right here. Let's then take their movement another week at a time here. And you can see that they're within a degree by August 13th. All right, so they're getting closer. And then the actual square, here we go. The actual square comes through as Mars and Jupiter conjoin. That's a powerful dynamic right there. We'll be looking at that more in depth, closer to the actual date of the Jupiter-Saturn square, but Mars in on the mix. And then we get the actual square right around August 19th. So on August 19th, you can see here's Jupiter at 1725, Saturn at 1728. So it's right around here that they first conjoin, or that they first square one another, excuse me. So if we go forward from here, Jupiter keeps going forward, Saturn's retrograding, so they separate. Of course, Jupiter's going to turn retrograde in October, and then their paths start moving back toward one another as Saturn turns direct. And then we're going to see that the two planets come together right about here. This is the two planets squaring one another on Christmas Eve. There it is. On Christmas Eve. So the Jupiter-Saturn square comes together one more time. Now, if we take this forward again, Jupiter turns direct in the new year and then is slowly going to work its way back into the square with Saturn. But here, it's interesting because Saturn will change signs into Aries and Jupiter will move into Cancer. So although the square persists and we get one more in June of 2025, they're in new signs. So it's sort of outside the realm of what we're going to explore in today's talk, since we're looking at the Gemini Pisces square. But this is just to say the square goes on a long time. All right, so what are some of the things we can say about Jupiter-Saturn squares? I already did a talk on Jupiter's long square to Saturn that breaks down the overall dynamics of the Jupiter-Saturn cycle and the specific meaning of a square. We tracked it back to the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius a couple years ago as the opening conjunction of a new Jupiter-Saturn cycle. But essentially what happens with Jupiter-Saturn cycles is we're on at the beginning of a Jupiter-Saturn cycle with the conjunction. It's really about the establishment of new structures. The reason that we tend to we get things wrong when it comes to Saturn a lot. People always say Saturn is structure. No. Saturn is about limits and boundaries. And all structures are something that we use in order often to set various limits or boundaries, right? So when we develop a governmental system or an educational system or a personal philosophical system, we use those systems as a way of granting some kind of structure or cohesion to our life. That sense of cohesion and unity and orderliness that provides both sensibility and a kind of rational, beautiful sense of wholeness. Ideally, that's all Jupiterian. However, one of the reasons that we establish such systems in the first place is because we recognize our limitations. For example, why establish any system of government whatsoever? And I'm just being very basic here. I'm not a political scientist. We establish a system of government because we recognize that we have human limitations. One of those human limitations is that we are not so great, not all of us are so great at impulse control. And we are not so great at respecting one another. We are not so great at maintaining the peace and protecting each other's dignity and so on and so forth. So we recognize, we have limits as human beings. Saturn is a planet that demarcates the limit or the boundary. And it says, here's a sort of a boundary or a sort of a line that exists, right? And it's the line. Remember, Saturn ruled the opposition, the aspect of the opposition, which is about opposite qualities that exist in a kind of tensing and relaxing with one another. They exist in a kind of dialectical. So we have civilized and we have wild. And Saturn is the planet that is associated with the demarcation of the boundary between, let's say, civilized and wild. And I'm not saying one is good and one is bad. It's just a kind of duality. And Saturn sort of, again, demarcates the boundary between the two. So when Saturn and Jupiter move through their cycles, Saturn is frequently helping us understand the boundaries between various qualities in the psyche and human experience that we have to develop systems in order to hold or host. So, for example, we need a government because we understand that human beings struggle with the boundary between civilized and uncivilized behavior. So, we have laws. So, frequently, people start thinking of Saturn as the law when Saturn is more like this very subtle uh, recognition that there is a sort of wall between the city and the jungle, the forest. And it's Jupiter that, in relation to the existence of that boundary, says, well, we ought to have a civilized, cohesive way of living. And as soon as we reach the limits of any kind of system that we've established, we start becoming aware of its imperfections or its impermanence. We become aware of what it can and cannot do for us. Then we start to revise, edit, change, transform the system. So, this is something that I mentioned in a previous talk that I did uh, at length on Jupiter and Saturn. So, I don't want to just like labor this all over again. But the basic idea, which I want everyone to be familiar with as we go into talking about Jupiter and Saturn square to one another, is that Jupiter Saturn interactions, from their conjunction, their square, their opposition, their closing square, and their conjunction, are all about the way in which systems and structures evolve in order to create coherence, meaning, a sense of order and unity around really hard dualities that exist in human life. Many of them are moral, some of them are political, some are spiritual, some are technological and intellectual, but there are these dualities. For example, a duality that is very much present right now is, let's say, the reliance upon artificial intelligence versus the reliance upon our own organic intelligence. And we're starting to establish, um, we're starting to see where the dividing line exists between the two. And we become aware that there even is a dividing line because we see how far we can go using artificial intelligence, and we start getting feedback. And then we start asking questions about how natural this is and what the differences are between the use of, say, AI and our own intelligence. That kind of dialectical, which right now we all may have very different, wildly different, passionate opinions about. But the point is that the dialectical and sort of a boundary between, say, organic human creativity or intelligence and AI, that line starts to appear. And as it appears, then Jupiter starts to develop ways of making meaning, coherence, virtue. Jupiter says, okay, there's this tension between these opposites. How do we meaningfully hold that tension through established systems? Maybe they're ethical or moral or technological, etc. So it's this very beautiful, subtle process that's going on with Saturn and Jupiter. And a lot of it is, historically, Jupiter-Saturn cycles have had a big role to play in mundane or collective astrology because they impact the changes on social and collective levels. Very obviously, we see these periods related to social collective transformations in various industries and government and in the realm of the law, etc. Personally, it's really interesting because these cycles tend to occur when we're ready for the evolution of various personal systems, personal philosophy, personal beliefs, the personal, way in which we do our business, or the various ideas and thoughts that inspire our careers, our relationships. And they evolve as various tensions start to rise to the surface. And we start to say, okay, how do I adjust and evolve in order to hold new dualities that are getting stronger within me? And that's a process that happens through the square, especially where there's a kind of, I love how Dane Rudyard, an early modern astrologer, described first quarter dynamics in the moon cycle, which I think are applicable to first quarter dynamics in other cycles. He said that it's a crisis of action. You get to this point where now it's time to do something. Remember the seeding point of Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius a couple of years ago. I want to say it was December 2021, but I feel like I'm spacing. Was it 22? No, it was 21. So yeah, it was no, was it? Hold on, guys. I think it was 2020. Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was 2020. It was December of 2020. Sorry, I spaced for a second. The conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in 2020 introduced the idea that there are certain tensions that exist in certain areas of our life. Look at the whole sign house of Aquarius. This is where the story began. Pluto, of course, has entered Aquarius, sort of re-upping the importance of this transformation. So everything is like the epicenter is in the whole sign house of Aquarius in your birth chart. The two planets got together in December of 2020, and we have this moment of needing to evaluate and recreate structures in order to hold various tensions. Now we're reaching the first quarter square where it's time to start acting on, and this is a moment where we go from the seeding and the conceptualizing of new things. The fact that the conjunction is sort of like the awareness that you know something needs to change structurally, systematically. And again, look at the whole sign house of Aquarius. Now we're at this point where it's time to actually act upon and make those changes. But it also, in order to do so, right, we have to look at the specific dynamics of the Jupiter-Saturn square, the first quarter square in this case. Here we will see that for the next year, one of the main things that's happening is that we have Saturn in Pisces, Jupiter's feminine sign, in a superior square to Jupiter in Gemini. So that's a very specific dynamic. And there are three things that we should watch for based on those details during this first quarter square, where the whole idea is to start initiating and acting upon the original impulses of the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction from 2020. So here are three things to watch for, given that we have Saturn in Jupiter's sign in a superior square to Jupiter. One is that Saturn will be restraining Jupiter. So here's the thing, is that Jupiter in Gemini is youthful and eager and filled with energy and ideas. It is like the high you get after your morning coffee. Bustling with, you have a list of 30 things, you're so excited, you get 2 of them done before the energy runs out, you get a caffeine crash, and today ends up being like any other day. So sort of a familiar pattern with a caffeine rush in the morning that I hope you can all relate to. In this sense, I use this as a metaphor, because Saturn is going to restrain youthful, bustling Jupiter. Jupiter, who wants to do so many things, who has so many irons in the fire in Gemini, who is just like teeming with creative ideas, but ideas that have not yet found a gravitational center. This is Jupiter's debility, by the way. Its detriment in the sign of Gemini is due to this in part. It's due to the fact that you're going to have a lot of irons in the fire, but it's going to be difficult to come to a place of mature, cohesive unity. Now, we have Saturn in Jupiter's sign of Pisces, a place that suggests a kind of unity emotionally, spiritually. Saturn in Pisces is sort of like a wise grandmother. And the wise grandmother at its best is restraining youthful Jupiter in Gemini, saying, yes, you're ready to recreate a bunch of things, but you can't go too fast. You can't have too many ideas. You need to refine and reflect upon and discriminate which are the best, which are the most useful, which will be of the greatest service to humanity, which are the most compassionate to yourself. Saturn in Pisces is providing a kind of gut check for the busy, excitable energy of Jupiter in Gemini. So you could think of it as Saturn sort of offering this kind of limit and saying, you have to be able to hold the tension of opposites very wisely and carefully with a lot of emotional intelligence in the way that you take off with new things right now. Okay. Wow. You know, some of us might feel like we're getting our wings clipped right away. Some of us might feel like it's too slow. Some of us might feel like it's too cautious or conservative. And at the same time, some of us may realize that slow and steady is the best way to go. There is a prayer that I have prayed in my life for 14 years since being a professional astrologer. And this prayer came to me during an ayahuasca ceremony, and where I just realized this is something I need to pray. And the prayer goes like this: Dear universe, please do not allow my company, my work as an astrologer, and this by extension is something my wife Ashley and I have prayed together for her work, for our company, for our yoga studio, for our family, for everything. Do not allow growth to happen too quickly for us to be able to be mature enough to handle it and to be good stewards of any success we receive. And to me, that's a really important prayer that Saturn in Pisces may very well be reminding Jupiter in Gemini to pray right now. Don't go so fast. Don't be so eager to develop. Don't be so eager to succeed. Even if it's exciting and there's things you actually can succeed at, don't go so fast that you can't actually hold, maintain, safeguard, steward with humility and reverence the success you're in receipt of. This is something that Saturn may be offering Jupiter right now. That kind of prayer may be the one that we're being reminded to pray. And it's especially easy when you're taking off to forget that prayer. At least that's my reflection. Now, the Saturn restraining Jupiter could also be the voice of cynicism, doubt, despair, lack of faith, uh, overly conservative or rigid qualities that are holding something back unnecessarily that we have to overcome, that we have to sort of acknowledge, but also move beyond. Don't let this slow you down. But how you know the difference is because you sit with it. Impulsive responses to the limitations of Saturn right now, even if Saturn is a curmudgeon, are not going to be the mature ones. The mature response is going to be to sit with, reflect upon, contemplate whatever check Saturn is providing, and then say, okay, now that I've thought about it, I realize this is something trying to hold me back when I actually need to grow and move forward. And so I have to let go of that doubt, or that limit is something I have to transcend. Or you could say this limit is something that is giving me really useful feedback and I need to listen. Number 2, Saturn requires a sacrifice from Jupiter. When a planet is in another planet's sign, one of the ways we can think about it is that it's a house guest. So it's like Saturn is a guest in the temple of Jupiter and Venus in Pisces. When Saturn is in that temple, it is very common for the host to provide something for the needs of Saturn. So if Saturn says, I want to take you to the limit, right? Then what does it want to take you to the limit of? It wants to take you to the limit of something Jupiterian or of something Venusian. I want to take you to the limit of your faith or belief in something where you doubt it. And Jupiter has to say, okay, I will provide for you a meaningful experience of doubt. Well, is there a better place for Jupiter to provide a meaningful experience of doubt, the limits of how true something can be, than in the sign of Gemini, which loves to be playful, curious, and skeptical? So Saturn may require something Saturnian and Jupiter may have to provide it. That may be doubt. That may be caution. That may be skeptical, curious, open-mindedness, but a refusal to commit to something that's being asked of you, like this emotional, passionate commitment. Get on board emotionally, be seized by the romantic energy of something. But Saturn in Pisces says, I need doubt of something emotional and passionate. I need to inquire about the limits of such things. And Jupiter in Gemini is actually in a pretty good position to be rational and skeptical and therefore fulfill the needs of Saturn. So you have to be creative with it, though, because there's a million other possibilities. Just think to yourself, what would Saturn require? Okay, Saturn requires death. Like Saturn is winter and decay, and Saturn is old age and mortality. So Saturn requires that those things be addressed by Jupiter in Gemini. Then what will it provide? It will provide you with the death, decay, old age, or limitations of ideas, thoughts, technologies, excitable, youthful, nervous energy. It will say, I need you to provide me with the death or decay of those things. And that's what Jupiter will give because of where Jupiter is. So you can play with the idea of Saturn requiring, well, like, think of Saturn as like if Saturn was in your house, right? And Saturn says, well, I need Saturnian things because I'm a guest. I'm not in my own house. So I don't have the freedom to meet my own needs. I have to rely on the host of the house. What kind of things would I give Saturn? If Saturn says, I rest in old age, and I am someone who works out every day, but Saturn's in my house, I may have to provide Saturn with rest in old age by taking an off day from workouts. Because that's how it would make sense for me as a host who works out every day to provide for Saturn who's in my house. Do you see what I mean? This is why when Saturn's in your first house and your body is the subject of the first house, you often provide Saturn with sickness. Do you see what I mean? One of the ways that ancient astrologers looked at the presence of planets in houses was in terms of having to provide, the ruling planet having to provide for the needs of the transiting or visiting planet. So think about that with respect to what Jupiter in Gemini has to do to fulfill what Saturn in Pisces needs. The other thing is that Saturn, another way of thinking about what it means for a planet to be in another planet's house is that they need something, that the planet actually needs something, not of their own nature, but of the nature of the planet whose temple they are in. So when Saturn is in Pisces, it needs something Jupiterian. Saturn is also in the dominating square over Jupiter. So it'd be like if someone came to your house and they're like, Adam, I just need your astrology. I know that's what you have to give. That's what's in this temple. And that's actually what I need. And yet they're in a dominating square. So they sit down and they say, okay, I say, okay, great. I've got some astrology for you. And I start delivering the astrology and they go, yeah, but that's not the kind I want. That's not what I want to hear. I need you to say it in a way that I want to hear, and as a host, I'd be like, well, I'm the astrologer. Aren't you supposed to, kind of respect what I have to give? But when the planet is in a dominating square over its host, you have a demanding guest. So you can also think about Saturn in Pisces as being sort of demanding, even though it's asking for something, even though it's requiring or requesting something. So if you think about that energetically, it's like there's a very needy and demanding presence in Saturn this summer in relation to Jupiter. I hope that's not too abstract. These are all supposed to, ideally, be ways that I have of helping all of you, students of astrology, to conceptualize how the square is playing out for the rest of the year, which is a very long process, right? And it goes into next year when they switch signs as well. So anyway, I am out of energy. That's it. I'm done. So I hope this was useful. I hope you have a great day. Leave comments and reflections. I'd love to hear from you guys. And let's see how this plays out. It'll be interesting. We'll be visiting this more as the summer goes on too. All right. Take it easy, everyone. Bye.